You've worked hard for years. Now you're ready to enjoy retirement. So you start drawing your Canada Pension Plan and old age security benefits as soon as you can to kick off your golden years. And just like that, you may have made the biggest mistake of your retirement before it even begins. It's an error that could cost you more than $100,000 of secure lifetime income. But why can taking CPP and OAS early be so damaging to your retirement? And more importantly, when should you consider taking them? Well, let's crunch the numbers to find out. You're watching Inside Investing. Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Inside Investing, the show that helps you level up your financial knowledge and sharpen your investing skills. Presented to you by TD Direct Investing, named Canada's best online brokerage by the Globe and Mail for 3 straight years and counting. I'm your host, Rob Moise. We're going to explore one of the most hotly debated retirement issues in today's episode, and that's when to take CPP and OAS. We're going to find out why drawing your benefits early can leave a big dent in your retirement savings, even if you reinvest the money. And we're going to hear why delaying your benefits can potentially pay major dividends early and later in retirement. Plus, we're going to take your questions about all things retirement later in the show, so stay tuned for that. For now, let's bring in today's special guest. Joining us is Michael J. Wiener, founder of the investing blog Michael James on Money. He's written extensively about CPP and OAS and pored over the numbers to find the optimal time to take each of them. Michael, it's great to have you with us. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Happy to be here, Rob.
I have to say, your blog is one of the more detailed and articulate ones out there when it comes to retirement topics, investing topics, even some personal finance stuff. And I know a lot of people would be grateful to know that you've done a lot of writing on CPP here because, when to take CPP and OAS, it's one of the trickiest decisions that retirees have to make here. And you've spent the time crunching the numbers here and trying to settle this debate as best as we can here. I'm curious, what motivated you to do all that digging into the numbers?
Well, if we go back quite a few years, I assumed I'd take CPP at when I was 60. But a couple of my blog readers over the course of months, even years, kept pushing back, trying to explain to me what the benefits were of delaying CPP. So I decided to crunch the numbers myself to try to find the right answer, both for myself and for my readers. So that was the motivation.
So I'm curious then, what surprised you the most about what you were finding when you poured through the data and looked at it more carefully?
Well, if you have enough savings to bridge the gap from retirement to collecting CPP, and you don't have compromised health, the benefits of waiting are substantial. You get the most CPP by waiting till you're 70, but if you start at 60, you'll get less than half as much each month, even accounting for the inflation adjustments. So delaying CPP might feel risky, but it actually reduces your retirement risk. You're trading your risky investment savings for a higher guaranteed inflation-protected pension for life.
And what I really love is that you're putting your money where your mouth is here because you're planning to take CPP and OAS at age 70. Why do you feel this decision is going to help you live more comfortably, not just later in retirement, but also earlier too?
Well, I worked out how much my wife and I could safely spend in 3 separate scenarios, taking CPP at 60, 65, and 70, and in the case of OAS, either 65 or 70. And I found out that in each case, in the case of delaying till 70, I could spend more safely starting right away mainly because I have enough savings to bridge that gap. I think the table you have up there is showing that our annual CPP benefits in the 2 scenarios, either CPP at 60 or taking CPP at 70. And in this study, I assumed 2% inflation and 3% for wage inflation. And with these assumptions, and along with the way the CPP rules work and our contribution history, it turned out that we were expecting benefits of about $11,000 a year if we started at 60. And if we did start at 60, by the time we're 70, that would grow to a little over 13,000. But it would be more like 29,000 if we waited till 70 to start. So you're giving up 10 years of benefits, but you end up with more than twice as much money. It's just substantial. It's 100, it works out to about 119% more money each month. So the math just says that we're better off with more guaranteed income indexed to inflation than we were to have more savings invested in risky assets. And in fact, when we do an analysis of how much we can safely spend, the decision to take CPP at 70 instead of 60 allows us to spend about $7,000 more per year starting right today. We're retired, and we still have quite a few years to go till we're 70. So it seems counterintuitive, but we can safely spend more now because of the decision to wait till we're 70 to collect CPP.
Those are some really, really powerful numbers at play here that I don't think a lot of people appreciate. So we're going to dig into the data and get a closer look at it, maybe open some eyes along the way here. Let's get into the heart of our conversation here. Is it a mistake to take CPP early? For those in our audience, if you want to get in on the conversation, please do so. We'd love to have you. Make sure you submit those questions to us. If you're watching on Webroker, you can use the chat box. If you're watching on our broadcast platform, you can use the questions and comments box. And if you're watching on our YouTube live stream, you can click on the link in the description. It's going to take you over to our broadcast platform, and that's where you can ask your questions. All right, Michael, before we dig into the research here, not to delay things here, but can you give us just a quick refresher on how the Canada Pension Plan works at a high level, some of the key points that people want to keep in mind if they may not be familiar with the program?
Well, you can start your CPP benefits anywhere between 60 and 70 years old. 65 is considered the normal starting age. And for each month that you delay starting CPP, your benefits, your benefits increase. So if we think of 65 as a normal start date, if you start earlier than that, you get a reduction of 0.6% each month for going earlier. And if you go later than that, you get 0.7% more each month. So you're either getting 64% of it at 60, or you're getting 142% of it at 70. And so I think of it as if you were going to get $1,000 a month at 65, you're choosing to take somewhere between 640 and 1,420 a month, depending on when you start. Now, these benefits rise over time with the consumer price index, what we normally just call inflation. But when you wait to start, it actually rises with wage inflation instead of price inflation, and wage inflation typically rises a little faster. So your CPP benefits are based on the average of your contributions paid, and you do get to drop out 17% of your contribution months, more if you were raised children or if you're disabled. I guess you can get additional dropouts as well for any months past age 65. So that's some more technicalities. But so the dropouts can get pretty technical. But whatever months are left over after all the dropouts, you take the average of that, and that dictates what your CPP payments will be.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of nuance to the program, so I would encourage folks who may not be all up to the finer details here to check it out on the Government of Canada's website. You can find a lot of information there. More nuance than we could probably cover here, but in any case, I don't want to delay getting into the data here because it's fascinating stuff. So let's dive into that research you did, Michael, on when to take CPP. And you've got some fantastic charts for us that really visualize your findings. And of course, your projections, as any projections are based on assumptions. So we can put up a chart on screen here just to kind of quickly give people a sense of those assumptions. But when it comes to the data, let's say you're planning to live to age 100. Take us through this chart that you have here. That explains the impact of delaying CPP.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, so see the chart now. So what this chart is doing is looking at what kind of return you get for delaying CPP. So we think of the first month as if you would have received, say, $1,000 a month at 65, by delaying, so that would mean 640 per month at age 60. And if you delay by just 1 month, you get an extra roughly $6.40 a month. So you'd be trading one payment of 640 for payments the rest of your life a little bit higher. And so it works out, depending on your exact contribution history, that is a return of between about 10 and 13%, above inflation. So that's just an enormous return. And so that's right at the beginning. As you delay longer from 60 to 70, the return is still excellent. It drops somewhat, but basically you're still looking at quite a high return right through to the end. And that's just something you can't beat by investing your money on your own, unless you're spectacularly lucky.
I think what I found really powerful about that was that even if you went all the way to delaying to 70, the real return on that would equate to something like 5.5, almost 6%, which is still in itself very powerful, particularly because inflation eats a good portion of your nominal returns over time here. And
Right.
many retirees are, of course, dialing back their risk appetite in retirement, and especially deeper in retirement, as they have like a shorter window here. So the likelihood that you're going to beat those real returns is pretty slim, at least if history is any guide, right?
Oh, absolutely. And if you could beat 7%, over above inflation with your investments, you just wouldn't really care about collecting CPP. I mean, it's too small an amount to worry about. And most people simply can't. I mean, even 3% above inflation is pretty good. By the time you take fees out for having a financial advisor and so on, a lot of people are getting less than that. So delaying CPP is just powerful.
Now, I know one of the common arguments that we often hear is that investors might believe that they can take CPP early and then reinvest that money if they don't need it immediately. They can bridge the gap, and then they feel like they might be able to earn a real return that's higher than the benefit that they would get from delaying CPP, basically. It's something that even some financial advisors suggest to their clients. What would you say to that?
Well, the 2025 Financial Planning Canada Standard Council's projection assumption guidelines for a balanced portfolio are for about a 2.8% real return. So that's 2.8% above inflation. And that's before deducting any reinvestment fees. So, the worst case return in the chart we had up earlier was inflation plus 5.5% in the last month before you turned 70. So in my opinion, it's just not reasonable to count on a higher investment return you can get by delaying CPP to age 70. That's if your retirement planning age is 100. If you were that confident getting such high returns, CPP shouldn't matter to you anyway. I think it's delusional to think you're going to get that much, and history just says that it's not possible.
Delusional. Them's his fighting words, Michael, but history is certainly on your side, I would say, for the most part there on that one. So
Right.
That's if you're planning to 100. But let's say, that you didn't think you were going to live that long. How do the numbers change if you plan to live to, say, age 90 or even age 80?
Right. So the first thing to understand is that the planning age isn't when do I think I'll die, because even if you think you're probably going to die, in your mid 80s, you're probably going to hang on to your money a little longer just in case. In which case, your planning age is really later. So if your real planning age, say, is age 90 because you're just less concerned about living that long. If you can count on, say, an inflation plus 5% return on your investments, you might choose to take CPP at about age 68. But even then, I think it's difficult to turn down a certain real return in the 3 to 5% range. So even then, for planning to age 90, I like taking CPP all the way at 70. Now, if you're planning to age 80, if your planning age is 80, things are a little different. If you're expecting real returns, say, in the 3% range, it makes sense to take CPP somewhere between 62 and a half years old and 65 and a half, depending on how many low contribution months you have. And delaying past 67 just doesn't make any sense. So if because of very poor health, or somewhat poor health, you think that your planning age should be 80, you're taking CPP earlier. And if your planning age is below 80, just take CPP at 60. It just doesn't make sense to delay that long.
It's just a matter of, what are your assumptions, right? And I think a lot of Canadians, especially because we tend to be living longer than ever these days, it might make sense to plan a little bit longer than I think people might traditionally have thought about. What do you think is a sensible age for your average Canadian to plan to? Is it 100, or is it somewhere in between, 80 and 100 or something like that?
Most experts talk about 95 or 100. I prefer 100 for myself, but it doesn't really, whether it's 95 or 100, you're still looking at taking, delaying CPP till you're 70. But I mean, some people do know that their health isn't good. Maybe it's a really poor family history and so on. But it is important to remember that you have to be pretty confident. Like you don't, if you delay CPP, if you don't delay CPP and you have less money, then you're really looking at, does it make sense to spend down everything you have by whatever age you've picked? Because if you're not going to spend down everything you have by that age, your real planning age is later anyway.
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of folks would probably want to leave a little bit of an inheritance to their kids, perhaps, or a charity or something like that. So planning a little bit longer can totally make sense. I totally hear what you're saying there. All right, I just want to take a quick pause in the action here. We've crunched a lot of numbers here, but I got a little bit of fun for the audience too here. It's a trivia question, and our trivia question goes like this. We've just heard that delaying CPP can make sense for some Canadians here, but what percentage of Canadian retirees actually delay taking CPP until age 70? Is it 21%, 14%, 7%, 2%? Quite a range of figures there. We're going to reveal the answer in just a moment here, but Michael, I wonder if you don't know the answer, would you venture a guess? But if you do know the answer, could you maybe drop a hint for our audience?
So I have heard the answer before. It's low.
Okay, that's a pretty compelling hint here, folks. So if you haven't figured it out by now, the answer, in fact, is just 2% of Canadian retirees delayed their CPP payments until age 70. That's according to data from Statistics Canada. Michael, I'm curious, in your mind, why do you think so few Canadians opt to delay CPP until age 70? And the stats even show delay it at all, frankly, despite this strong financial incentive that there is to do so.
Well, some people don't even know they can. People seem to know that they can do it, wait till they're 65, but some people don't even know you can wait till you're 70 to get more money. People often don't want to retire early, and they hope, or they do want to retire early, sorry, and they hope that CPP will be enough to make that possible. And when they hear talk of delaying CPP, what they hear is you have to retire later, and they certainly don't like that idea. With some savings, you don't have to apply for CPP as soon as you retire. If you're determined to retire and you have some savings, you can wait to take CPP. And people don't really understand how much CPP rises if you wait. And sometimes it becomes an emotional decision, and some people aren't as good at crunching the numbers. And if you need more money from CPP to support your retirement before you're 70, then you have no choice but to take it earlier. But that said, if you have enough money to bridge the gap, you have a big decision to make.
All right, really interesting trivia question there. I was blown away by the numbers here too, but appreciate you sharing your perspective on that one there, Michael. I want to continue on here because you also did a similar deep dive into whether it makes sense to take old age security early. Before we dive in, again, can you kind of just give us a quick overview of the OAS program and the key points that investors would want to understand about it?
Okay, so unlike CPP, the earliest you can start collecting OAS is 65. And you can delay OAS by up to 5 years for an increase of 0.6% each month. So the maximum increase then is 36%, and if you take OAS at 70. And Canadians who collect OAS now get a 10% increase in benefits when they get to be 75 years old. OAS payments are indexed to price inflation, and the increases before you start collecting are also indexed to price inflation. So OAS doesn't have that wage inflation complication. For those retirees fortunate enough to have high incomes, OAS has clawed back at 15% of income over a certain threshold. And so that's kind of outside the scope of the analysis that I did. Not many people are subject to clawback. They tend to be wealthier, and they're not that concerned about smaller amounts like CPP and OAS anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting all your OAS clawed back here, you probably have the good problem of having a lot of money. So you probably don't have to worry about these things. But in any case, I'm curious to see, what did you find about taking OAS early here? Again, you have another fantastic chart here. Can you walk us through what we're seeing here with this OAS chart?
Sure. So the case for delaying OAS isn't as compelling as it is for CPP, but it still generally makes sense if you have enough savings to bridge the gap and you're in good health. So for a planning age of 100, your real returns are above 4% for delaying all the way to age 70. And that's what I plan to do. If your planning age is only 90, delaying till maybe 68 or 69 can make sense. And for a planning age of 80 and below, you just take your OAS at 65. And again, there could be complications for wealthy people who are subject to clawback.
Again, another thing that strikes me about this chart is that even if you delay all the way to 70, your real return equivalent would still be quite high, 4-ish%, whatever like that. I think a lot of people would take that. It's still pretty compelling, especially, again, if this is a real return, not a nominal return here. So one thing that we've talked about here, you mentioned a little bit earlier, was that you need to have enough savings to bridge the gap here. And I think some retirees might worry that they don't either have enough savings, or they don't know whether they have enough savings to bridge that gap, so they can hold off delaying CPP and OAS until age 70. How much would they need to have saved based on the analysis that you've done?
So the savings, I think of it as a way of sort of the price of buying larger, inflation index government pension, and the price is quite a bargain. Certainly a lot better than buying an annuity from an insurance company. So if you're 60 now, and you've retired and you want to know how much savings you need, what I would do is go and look at what amount you're going to get if you wait to take CPP at 70. So in the example I have there, it was I believe it's $1,842 a month. And you just multiply that by the 120 months that you would be collecting between 60 and 70. And that works out in this example to be $221,000. And then just as a buffer, you probably don't want your total savings to go to zero. So let's say you want a $100,000 buffer. So in this example, you would want to have $321,000. So, if you have that much, you can afford to delay your CPP to 70. Now that would double for couples. And the chart does show for, how things go with shorter delays. So if you only go to, say, age 65, you're taking a much smaller figure and multiplying it by 60 months. So, it gives you an idea of how long you can delay and not have your savings dip too low. And so there are other complications too, depending what your plans are. So if you plan to spend extra in your 60s, say for what some people call the go-go years, then you need more savings, obviously. And if you want to leave an inheritance, then you need to have more savings. And if you plan to also delay OAS, that's more savings still.
And so just to clarify what we're talking about here, when we talk about excess savings to bridge that gap, this would be a savings beyond what you would need to cover your expected retirement expenses already, right? Just so I'm clear on that?
Yes, but I would say that, if people have other pensions, things can get more complex, but it really does make sense to spend your savings down. So you might really only have $100,000 left, and say, I'd rather have these large CPP payments for the rest of my life than having others. So, I suppose if you were planning to buy a cottage when you're 75 or something like that, you'd have to hold back those savings. But it really doesn't make sense. A lot of people don't like the idea of tapping into their savings but it really doesn't make sense to go too far down that road, because then you're giving up this all of these much larger CPP payments later in life.
I found anecdotally, at least, that some of the best investors have a really hard time psychologically letting go of their savings. They're used to the number in their account constantly going up over the years, and it's hard to kind of actually spend these things down. You talked about go-go years here. Of course, that's the fun of retirement, right? Living it up when you don't have to work. And retirees, generally speaking, want to do that in the earlier part of their retirement, when they're able to actually enjoy their money the most. So I could see some saying, wouldn't it make sense to take CPP and OAS, earlier, just to enable that, rather than wait until 70 when things like travel might be harder to do? What do you think about that?
Well, if they have enough savings, they can. So I would never advocate that people live small in their 60s just to be rich when they're much older. The idea is to spend from your savings to live a good life. And so you can just spend more from your savings to achieve what you want in these go-go years. If you have the savings, then spend them then, and then use the large CPP to live a decent life later on. So, if delaying CPP and OAS to age 70 has a net benefit, then doing so will actually allow you to spend more during your early years of retirement than if you took CPP early.
One thing, too, that I'm curious about is, let's put the numbers aside for a second. Do you think that there are any good reasons to take CPP and OAS early, even if the numbers would suggest that it would make sense to take them later? Like, what are some of those reasons?
Well, so one reason is you just don't have enough savings to live on, obviously. But this is different from just not wanting to touch your savings. Excuse me. Another reason is if you're so certain that you're going to have a short life expectancy that you'd be willing to spend all your savings before you're 80, then go ahead and take CPP and OAS as soon as you can. Some people say to take CPP early if you have long periods before you're 60 with no CPP contributions, but this doesn't actually hold up. The benefits of delaying CPP are slightly less in this case, but still quite compelling. That was the difference in an earlier chart between the red line and the blue line, but they were both still represented very high returns. Now, some might feel confident that they can earn a higher return investing, CPP and OAS money, but that is just not, as I said earlier, I think that's mostly delusional. So maybe if you're concerned, maybe you might be concerned that the government will run out of money to pay CPP, but CPP is on a pretty strong footing today, and in the future, a desperate government might do something that makes trading savings for CPP look better, like adding taxes to RRSPs or TFSAs, and some high earners have tax reasons that complicate when they should start taking OAS because of the OAS clawback. So that's another good reason. A kind of technical reason is that if you happen to die close to age 70, your spouse will see a drop in income, and of course you don't want to leave your spouse in a financial bind. So between lower living expenses when it's just one person and the CPP survivor's pension, this is not a problem for most couples. But in some very narrow cases, it can make sense to have a small amount of life insurance for a few years.
Okay, so it's not never, but it's something that you should carefully think about as you're planning for your retirement. As you've shown, Michael, the benefits of delaying CPP and OAS can be really compelling for a lot of Canadians. So we really appreciate you digging into the data for us here and bringing that to light to our viewers. I think it's quite eye-opening to a lot of folks. It certainly was to me. And I know I'm far away from retirement, but I'm already thinking about how I might be starting to plan and tweak things here and there. In any case, we got a lot more to get to here, but I just wanted a quick note to our viewers here. If you're enjoying the show, then make sure you check us out on social media. TD Direct Investing, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and you can get sneak peeks at upcoming episodes, plus a ton of other content designed to help build your investing knowledge. So give us a follow when you can. You won't regret it. Great stuff on there. All right, Michael, a key part, obviously, of deciding whether to delay CPP and OAS is knowing if you can afford to do it. So I want to bring in my colleague, Caitlyn Cormier here. She's going to give us a closer look at one of the tools that we have in WebBroker that can help with that. So Caitlyn, welcome to the show. Good to have you live here with us now.
Yes, I'm happy to be here, Rob. Really excited to be here on the show.
Awesome. Well, hey, listen, without further ado, tell us, what is this tool in WebBroker that can help investors figure out how much they'll need to save for retirement, help plan out to what they're going to need?
Absolutely, yeah. Planning for retirement can be such an overwhelming task, and as we've been talking about today, so many decisions to make. So it's nice to have something to make the process at least a little bit smoother. So let's hop into WebBroker and look at our goals tool. So when you come into WebBroker, there's simply a tab right at the very top that says goals. When you click on that, it's going to bring you to this page. So you'll notice as I go through, there are kind of some things to fill in here. So of course, investing for retirement, you've got your age, how much you're currently earning. It's going to ask you, what age you'd like to retire. And this one's really interesting too. How much money will you need when you retire? It's giving you sort of a range here. And a quick fact to say that on average, people need about 60 to 80% of their current income to maintain a similar lifestyle in retirement. So kind of some good information there to make quick decisions as far as filling this out. Once you move forward, we're going to get into the investor profile side of things. So you do have to know a little bit about what type of investor you are so you can choose the appropriate choice here. There is kind of some comparisons you can do. You can watch a video to understand better. For the purposes of today, I've just gone ahead and thrown moderate in there. You can even create your own profile. As you can see here, you can actually input your own if you know kind of specifically which one you are. Otherwise, we can save and continue. How much money do you have saved, maybe that you're going to transfer into this account, as well as any ongoing contributions, of course, an extremely important part of this whole process. When you're ready and you click save and continue, it is going to give you a kind of a projection for how much you should have saved based on how much you are currently saving and sort of the trajectory that you're on. So of course, in this case, we're seeing we're a little bit short from our goal. The great news is that this tool is actually really easy to adjust. So for example, you can increase your contribution amount really easily through here. You can also go back and change, for example, if we wanted to go in and instead make ourselves a more aggressive investor so that we potentially have some higher returns, we can do that, save and continue, get back to the end, and see how that would impact our growth of our investments. So we can see just with those couple changes, we're a lot closer. But it's a very interesting tool to use, and it can really let you know whether you're on track or not to meet your retirement goals.
All right, Caitlyn, fantastic. Now, one of the things we've been talking about here, obviously, on the show is assumptions, right? It all boils down to assumptions. So if you wanted to tweak assumptions, maybe something around like what your inflation assumption would be, or even like how much you're going to get from like CPP and OAS and stuff like that, is that something you can do in this tool?
Absolutely. So that is a key piece, and part of the reason why I left this with such a big gap, because there are assumptions that can be adjusted. So if we click down here towards the bottom of the screen, we'll see view assumptions. And it's going to show us, so here is actually easier to change your investor profile just by clicking here and choosing something different, but it's giving us an idea of what it's kind of calculating our returns at. And of course, Canada Pension right here. So you can either include CPP or QPP. And if you know how much you're going to be receiving, you can type it simply in there, as well as OAS. Another thing I really like here is you can add in if you had, for example, a work pension. So you can add that in so that it's included in your calculation, whereas previously it may not have, it wouldn't have been taking that into consideration. So it may show me short when I'm not really. Here we can adjust inflation. So if we'd like inflation higher or lower, and I know we've talked a lot today about planning to 100, so we can go ahead and adjust this. This is set for 90. We can adjust it to 100, click save, and it will adjust our outcome here. So now we can see we're a lot closer. We added 10 years of life and a bit of pension income. So we're a little bit out of our range still, but we're a lot closer than we were originally because our goals adjusted for the assumptions and adding in, as I said, that pension income that we might be receiving.
I gotta say, Caitlyn, this chart looks a lot better than the one that we saw before with that massive gap. So I like it. Play around with the settings, see what it takes to do. Thanks for showing us that. Really appreciate it, Caitlyn. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thanks so much, Rob.
That was Caitlyn Cormier. She's our Senior Client Education Instructor here at TD Direct Investing. All right, Michael, we're going to have to leave the interview portion of our conversation there, but we're not done yet. Okay, we're going to open the floor. We're going to take some questions from our viewers. So let's get into it. We got a lot of great questions coming in here. Donald has a question for us here. Donald is asking, how will delaying CPP and OAS to 70 affect the death benefit for my spouse if I were to pass away?
So I guess we're talking about the survivor benefit here. The survivor benefit is calculated based on the amount that you would have received at age 65 for both your spouse and yourself. So my understanding of the rules is that it doesn't make much difference at all.
Okay, I'm just scrolling through here to look at our next question. This one's coming from Bridget, and Bridget wants to know, what if you retire from your regular job at age 60? Is it still worth waiting, considering that your income from age 60 onward would be zero, and those years would be included in your CPP calculation?
So it's true that you will have to use some of your dropouts for those years, and that will prevent you from being able to do any dropouts in other low contribution years earlier in your career. But the amount that affects your CPP is relatively small compared to the bonus you get from waiting. So it still makes a lot of sense to wait. Of course, as long as you're healthy and have enough savings to do so.
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting point. Thanks for clarifying that. Diane's got a question here. Diane is saying, have there been any recent changes to federal regulations regarding CPP contributions or withdrawals? Or, Michael, give us your crystal ball here. Do you foresee any upcoming changes?
There's been the change of the CPP being expanded. So that will become more important for young people a long time from now. But for anyone who's approaching retirement relatively soon, the difference that makes will be quite small. As for upcoming changes, I don't have any useful crystal ball. I don't know what changes might take place in the future.
Okay, well, hey, I think she might have been anticipating that maybe CPP would have changed for the worse, but it sounds like it changed for the better, right? So, in a lot of ways. Yeah. So that's good news there. Yale has a question for us. Yale is saying, do you have a calculation showing the break-even point if CPP and OAS are taken early and the payments are invested instead? Putting you on the spot here to crunch some numbers for us, Michael. I don't know if you can swing that, but do you have something in mind?
I did do a calculation like that. I don't have access to the numbers right now. I wrote a post on my blog some time ago about that. But I've since decided that thinking too much about break-even ages is not as useful because people don't tend to think about it the right way. If we say that the break-even age is, say, pick a number, 82. What happens is people can imagine dying before 82, and so they want to take CPP early. And that's not really the right way to think about it. You should be thinking about, would you hold back your savings just in case you live past 82? And if the answer is yes, then your planning age is much later. So in most cases, the break-even age isn't that relevant. Now, the break-even age can make sense in the case where somebody's so wealthy they have no intention of ever spending all their money, and I'm not really worried too much about that scenario. I'm thinking more about people who need the money to live on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so Yale, you asked, Michael delivered here, good stuff. We have another question here. We're going to keep this train rolling here, and I believe John has a question here. Let me just find John here. I see we have it up here. So John is saying, what are some strategies to avoid the OAS clawback if you have a defined benefit pension and a sizable RRSP with plans to draw down the RRSP between ages 60 and 70 before converting it at 71?
For the most part, there aren't a lot of good strategies that make a big difference. there are some small optimizations that I've seen online to play games to be able to get a little bit more money in a single year and so on. There are some things you can do. I can't off the top of my head list them all, because it's this concern for obviously somebody who's much wealthier hasn't been my main focus.
Right, and I think one thing too, just to keep in mind about OAS clawback, is it's not like you cross the threshold and all of a sudden like all your OAS is gone, right? Like, this happens in like a pretty incremental way. You really have to get up to like a pretty high top end before your OAS is completely eliminated. So something to keep in mind for folks here. Amy has a question here for us. Amy is saying, would it make more sense to take CPP and OAS early or late if I want to leave a good-sized inheritance to my children?
Well, it depends on the nature of your desire for the inheritance. If you want to make sure that they get a lot of money if you die young, then you have to take CPP early. But I find people will say, yes, that's what they want. But the thing is, if you do live a long time and they won't get anything for a very long time, why is it so important that they get a lot when you're young? So I find that to be a little bit puzzling, the way some people think about it. But in general, if you do happen to live a long time, by taking CPP late, that will allow you to leave more money, not less.
Okay, Monica's got a question for us here. Monica's saying, what about if you're single? Would the strategies be any different?
Being single takes away some of the complexity. I think the case for delaying CPP is more straightforward, and I think it still makes sense.
Do you think, just out of curiosity though, that there's something that most people tend to either get wrong or misunderstand about CPP or OAS that you constantly see coming up maybe in the comments in your blog posts?
So one thing I see a lot is people not really understanding the inflation adjustments. And it's not just people on blog posts. I mean, I see financial advisors and even some financial planners making this sort of mistake. They try to work out the returns that CPP provides, and they forget that these are real returns as opposed to just, they think they're just nominal returns. So they come up with a figure like 5% or 6%, and they think that doesn't sound very good. But in fact, it's excellent. So the fact that all these returns we've been talking about throughout are real returns, meaning plus inflation, makes the case for delaying CPP quite compelling.
Yeah, certainly we've seen inflation rear its ugly head here in recent years, so it provides a lot of comfort, I think, to folks knowing that it's going to be adjusted, these payments, with whatever inflation throws at us here. We have time for one more question here. This is Dina, and Dina is asking, if you can sustain taking CPP and OAS until age 70, is there any issue with leaving Canada by age 70? Will you still be able to receive the full entitlement?
That's an excellent question, and I'm hesitating because I think the answer is you still get your money, but I'd hate to get it wrong. So I'm going to say that's one I would have to look up.
Okay, so Dina, before you book any flights here to your tropical destination for the rest of your retirement, make sure you clarify that one with the government of Canada there. Anyway, Michael, we threw a lot at you and you answered it all fantastically. We really appreciate your insight, digging into the data for us, considering all these different scenarios. It's a lot to process and you did a phenomenal job. We really appreciate you joining us here.
Thanks.
And of course, for those in our audience, we appreciate you tuning in as well. Make sure you check out next week's episode. We're kicking off Options Education Month here at TD Direct Investing. Richard Ho from BMO ETFs is going to explain why trading options might be something you want to consider and what it takes to do it. And of course, there's also a more hands-off option if you're curious but not sure you want to do all the legwork that he'll talk about as well. So make sure you check that out. That's all the time we have for this episode of today's show, though. From everyone at Inside Investing, we really appreciate you watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Have more questions? Check out the links to the right and in the description below.